Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel. Today is April 26th, and over the past 24 hours, many important events have taken place. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to subscribe. Your support helps the channel grow. Thanks to everyone who's already with us. Now let's dive into the situation. What's happening on the negotiation front? Uktok has met with Putin again. The talks lasted about 3 hours. Reports mention some progress, but no details have been revealed. Nothing concrete was shared. What this success entails and what consequences it may bring remain unclear. If we look at Ukrainian statements, Kyiv is still unwilling to make concessions. In this context, it's hard to understand what kind of progress we're even talking about. Meanwhile, fighting continues, and we're keeping a close eye on developments. Let's open the map. Despite the talks, the intensity of combat has not decreased. If anything, it has increased. This makes sense. Before a potential ceasefire, both sides try to seize as much territory as possible. Though honestly, there's no guarantee a ceasefire will even happen soon. Right now, everything is on thin ice. Sumy region here, we see steady advances from both sides around Zhuravka. The western area has been cleared up to Vasilivka, while the eastern push reaches the border itself. In total, about 7 square kilometers have been liberated. But more important than the numbers is the fact that the flanks near Zhuravka are now fully secured, eliminating the threat of rear attacks. This allows further movement toward Belovody. Russian sabotage reconnaissance groups have already been spotted there. But an even more significant development is the advance across the border after the liberation of Oleshnya in Kursk oblast. Russian forces have launched an offensive deeper into Sumy oblast, just as we predicted a couple of weeks ago. And this is happening while fierce battles still rage in Kursk oblast itself, particularly in Gornal, where the Ukrainian armed forces, UAF, are desperately holding on to the last 4 square kilometers. Footage from these areas shows a horrific scene, fields littered with the bodies of dead Ukrainian soldiers. Despite the intense fighting in Gornal, Russian units have begun advancing into Sumy oblast from the Oleshnya area. American maps cautiously mark this zone in grey, but in reality the depth of penetration has already exceeded 1 kilometer. That might not sound like much, but for a conflict of this scale, it's a solid pace, especially considering the offensive has only just begun. The direction of attack is toward the village of Lochnya, where brutal fighting is ongoing. Russian forces reached the center, were pushed back, then returned. The intensity of the battle is due to Lochnya's direct link to Yunakovka, where the UAF constantly brings in reinforcements. Now, with the offensive from Oleshnya, Lochnya will be attacked from 2 sides, north and east. The UAF won't be able to hold their positions for long in such conditions and will likely retreat to Yunakovka, where the main battle will unfold. As of today, Russian forces control 76.4% of Sumy oblast. This is stable control. Grey zones remain, of course, but the key areas are secured. What's especially surprising is that all this has been achieved by light motorized units, on motorcycles and ATVs, without heavy armor, and the advance continues every single day. Lyman and Pokrovsk direction fighting is ongoing for the village of Nov. The Azov fighters have somewhat recovered and are trying to organize a defense using urban terrain. However, Russian forces are advancing not only in Novi, but also toward Redkodub. Redkodub is being targeted by airstrikes and artillery. 3 airstrikes and numerous artillery strikes were reported in just the past day. Pokrovsk direction. There's also activity here. American maps mark the southern part of Lisovka as fully under Russian control, but in reality the northern part beyond the river is also secured. The UAF no longer has the advantage here. Pressure is increasing in the areas of Zverevo, Chinushino, and the village of Kotlina. Attacks have also intensified near Udakne. However, the situation in Udakne is complicated. Urban combat is fierce, but Russian assault units continue their attacks. Novopavlivsk, Pavlivka. Direction. A real nightmare is unfolding here. Russian pilots are striking with immense force. The UAF attempts counterattacks under a barrage of FAB bombs, but Ukrainian FPV drone operators failed to detect our assault aircraft. Western flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. On the western flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, Russian forces have advanced from Tarasivka and Zelenopol toward Alexandropol and in the direction of Stara Mykolaiivka. Fighting has begun on the southern outskirts of the latter village. Russian assault units reached the area from Kalinovo. On the other side of the road, Russian troops are pushing toward Romanivka and engaging in combat in the western part of Petrivka. A possible scenario is that Russian forces will advance further north to seize control of the road from Oleksandro-Kalinov to Kleban-Baik and Katarinivka. This would cut off the Ukrainian garrison in Shcherbinivka from its main supply routes. North of Toretsk, the battle for Zadakne continues. According to some reports, Ukrainian forces have reappeared in the Zabalka district in southern Toretsk. Chasiv Yar sector positional fighting continues with minor advances reported in the Zakhidny district and near Stupochki. Siversk sector Russian forces are expanding their zone of control around Horobila. Offensive operations continue east of Hryhorivka, Krasnohorivka direction. The battle for Nov and Redkodub persists. Russian aviation is striking the latter village with FAB bombs, neutralizing Ukrainian strongholds. Positional fighting continues near Kolodyazy and Torske, Kupiansk direction. Russian forces are expanding their zone of control, including over key highways from Kupiansk toward Veliki Burluk. Zaporizhzhia sector. No significant changes have been reported on the front line. However, Russian forces near Shabaki in the steppe region are increasing artillery usage to suppress Ukrainian firing points and fortifications. Kyiv is deploying additional drone units which are significantly complicating Russian advances. Breakthrough near Bogdanivka. On the morning of April 24th, reports emerged that Bogdanivka, one of 3 villages closest to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, had come under Russian control. This village, located west of Selidov, was the last stronghold of the so-called Eastern Wall defensive line. Later, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed this information. Thus, the defenses of the Ukrainian 72nd Brigade, the Black Zaporozhians, previously defeated in Vuhledar and replenished with radical nationalists, have been breached. Recent advances near Preobrazhenka recall that a few days earlier, Russian forces liberated Preobrazhenka, from where the assault on Novopavlivka, a key Ukrainian logistics hub for the Pokrovsk and Velika Novosilka fronts, was launched. While the Ukrainian military concentrates forces to hold back the Russian 41st Army on the approaches to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, units of the 2nd Army, Central Grouping, have begun advancing across the entire front, focusing on the southern flank of Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmysk. Ukrainian panic and mobilization efforts. Ukrainian military channels are flooding the internet with fundraising appeals, warning of a deteriorating situation near Zverevo. Frontline Ukrainian soldiers blame the spring weather for their difficulties. A prominent Ukrainian blogger with the call sign Mukhnoi notes that with the arrival of greenery, Russian forces have intensified their offensive along the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. According to him, fighting has flared up near Myrov, where Russian troops are outflanking Pischane, while continuing attacks toward Chinushino and Novukrainka. Mukhnoi also complains about Russian airstrikes. He predicts that Ukrainian forces will soon lose the western outskirts of Lysivka. Such statements by Kyiv-aligned bloggers prepare their audience for the inevitable loss of settlements. Clearly, only rearguard units remain in the village, doomed to face FAB bomb strikes. Western analysts' observations. Western analysts report that Russian forces are advancing along the railway toward Chinushino station, using the tracks as cover from flanking attacks. They note that a similar tactic was used during the offensive from Okhoratine to Novorodivka. Increased pressure on Ukrainian forces is expected on other sectors of the front, complicating reserve redeployments. Ukrainian counterattacks, largely ineffective. The Ukrainian military attempted to organize counterattacks near Kotlyarivka, Troitske and Bogdanivka to disrupt the Russian offensive tempo. Ukrainian media, as usual, exaggerates these actions, inflating their significance. Russian military correspondent's perspective. Renowned Russian war correspondent Yevgeny Podubny explains that Ukrainian forces still have sufficient resources for effective defense. They possess reconnaissance capabilities, Western artillery, and modern drones, which complicate Russian operations. Pokrovsk-Shakhtarsk axis, a single battlefield. The Pokrovsk and Shakhtarsk directions essentially form a single theater of war. Advances toward Krasnoarmeysk are directly linked to successes in southern Donbass. Here, the Russian Vostok, East grouping, maintains the initiative despite fierce Ukrainian resistance. Russian troops methodically grind down enemy defenses with small assault units, securing new positions to prepare for the encirclement of key Ukrainian strongholds. Breakthrough near Bodanivka. In the Bodanivka area, Russian assault troops advanced 1.5 kilometers along a dam, breaching Ukrainian defenses and capturing a height and two positions. The Ukrainian military admits that the Constantinople-Bodanivka road is no longer usable for them. Ukrainian desperation and internal criticism. On the Novopavlivka axis, it's pure horror. Russian attacks don't stop. Their aviation is constantly working over Bodanivka. Recently, Russians dropped surrender leaflets from drones. Many instinctively wanted to survive, but these attempts were harshly suppressed, Ukrainian sources report. Ukrainian forces are irritated by the evacuation of civilians from combat zones, mockingly calling them zhaduny, those who wait. Interestingly, Ukrainian commanders have begun openly criticizing young volunteers, aged 18 to 24. The command of the 79th Brigade, defending positions near Novopavlivka, warned that the situation would soon become even more brutal for these inexperienced soldiers. Conclusion. Progress is being made, but at a heavy cost. Now, a few words about politics. The meeting between Putin and Witkoff lasted 3 hours and was constructive and productive. As reported by Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov, the discussion helped further align positions not only on Ukraine but also on other international issues, he noted. The talks between Putin and Witkoff touched on the possibility of resuming direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. In line with the agreement between the presidents of the US and Russia, productive Russian-American dialogue will continue at various levels, Ushakov stated. Peskov described Witkoff's visit as shuttle diplomacy. Witkoff conveyed a message from Trump to Putin and will then relay Putin's response back to Trump, Peskov explained. Trump, for his part, stated that the US has no deadline for peace talks on Ukraine. No deadline, I just want to get it done, to agree on peace in Ukraine as soon as possible, Trump said. Yet just 2 days ago, he suggested that in 2 weeks, the question of the US withdrawing from the peace process would have to be raised. Zelensky has no cards left, but he keeps wanting more and more in negotiations, the US president remarked. So I hope he finally closes the deal, because I don't think Putin would do this for anyone but me. I think he had the idea to fight to the end, but I believe he's ready to make a deal. And I'll say this, so far it's been easier to negotiate with Putin than with Zelensky. The longer Zelensky locks horns with Trump, there's no other way to put it, given his Kryvyi-Rih-style diplomacy, the less room he has for further political maneuvers, writes the Telegram channel resident. Washington, for now, is behaving tactfully despite Zelensky's provocations, but solely because of the deal on Ukraine's natural resources. Peace is not the goal for the US, just a pleasant side effect. Trump wants Ukrainian resources and infrastructure. He wants control over them. But once the deal is signed, everything will change drastically. Zelensky will be tolerated only as long as he's useful. The Bankova team understands this, which is why they're stalling, hoping London and certain European capitals will back them up. But that's an illusion. Europe is stretched to its limits, and Britain isn't ready to take real responsibility. By betting on prolonging the war, Zelensky hasn't just doomed himself, he's set up the entire country, which will likely lose even more territory. The situation is on the verge of catastrophe, but the worst is yet to come. The attack in Balashikha, a major escalation. In an explosion in Moscow's Balashikha district, Lieutenant General Yaroslav Maskalik, deputy head of the Russian General Staff's main operational directorate, MOD, was killed. In my opinion, this is the most serious sabotage attack against our country by hostile forces in the first quarter of the 21st century. Perhaps even in Russia's entire modern history, writes war correspondent Alexander Sladkov. For those unaware, the MOD is the backbone of the General Staff. It handles all strategic military planning for Greater Russia. This is the scale of the blow we've suffered. This isn't just tugging Moscow's mustache, it's not just a giant provocation against the entire Russian military machine, demanding a major personal response. This is a challenge that must be answered, loudly and decisively. There can be no forgiveness. The response must be so severe that the enemy feels fear and the rest of the world feels terror. Otherwise, no one will fear us, and thus no one will respect us. Eternal memory to the slain general. Retaliation cannot be delayed. Ukraine's desperation and escalating sabotage. The worse the situation in Ukraine becomes, economically, militarily, in terms of supplies, air defense, troop replenishment, disrupted logistics, and destroyed depots, the more desperate and aggressive their sabotage attacks grow. All experts, Western, Russian, Ukrainian, without exception, interpret the situation as Ukraine's impending collapse in every sense. Peace talks, a top political issue. The topic of peace negotiations in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict remains a key political issue. Many uncertainties persist, keeping not just foreign journalists, but key players on edge. Adding fuel to the fire is Donald Trump's rhetoric, as he recently claimed that Russia is already making major concessions to its opponent. The US president believes Moscow could exploit its battlefield advantage to demand control over all of Ukraine, but isn't doing so. Kyiv, in turn, reacts painfully to Washington's moves, interpreting them as sympathy toward Moscow. Recent developments suggest the Zelensky regime's strategy will likely involve provocations and sabotage to compensate for military failures. Several high-profile incidents support this theory. London sabotage talks negotiations in London, supposedly scheduled for April 23rd, with key European and American figures, were abruptly derailed. Foreign media had reported that these talks were meant to discuss the West's stance on the terms of a future Moscow-Kyiv agreement. But a day before the meeting, several outlets, including the Financial Times, published articles claiming the US was preparing to push Europe to accept Crimea's loss and other concessions. Those following closely noticed red flags. The reporting was deliberately convoluted, leaving more questions than answers. The timing of the exclusive leak was clearly calculated, right before the talks. The media held the story until the last moment, creating confusion, outrage, and ultimately scaring participants away.